Good morning. My name is Andrew Plato. I'm President and CEO of Anitian. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. This is the Anitian Information Security 2014 Roundtable, and I want to thank all of you for attending today. If you have questions at any point during this roundtable, please use the question feature in the GoToWebinar. You can ask the questions. That's why I have my laptop here, and I'll be able to see those. We have an interesting conversation for you this morning. Let me go ahead, though, and introduce our distinguished panel of experts here. No laughing, James. Let's start on my left with James Fugelman, who is our awesome penetration tester and security analyst. Next to him is Adam Gadosh, Director of Professional Services, and he's awesome, too. There's, of course, me. On my right is Robert Cooper, one of our pen tester and security analysts. And last but definitely not least is Jack Dempsey, who is also one of our senior security analysts. Stephen Swan, who was supposed to join us today, took ill, unfortunately, so he's not going to be here today, unfortunately. Well, thanks, guys, for joining me today. This should be a lively conversation, and as I've told all of them, and we've already pre-discussed, we're just going to sort of let it go today, and we're just going to talk our ideas and our feelings and our thoughts on a few different topics. We have 3 topics we want to talk about today. The first one, and we kind of decided on these topics after looking back over 2014 and saying, what were the big issues of this year? What were the big topics that really kind of grabbed everybody's attention? And so the 3 topics that we want to talk about are point-of-sale hacking, the problems around or the issues around cyber war and cyber crime for that matter, and then our last topic will be about cloud security and companies moving to the cloud. And then, of course, we will be taking your questions, comments, concerns, issues. If you just want to generally froth about something, please use the chat or the question feature. All right, so let's kick this off. Let's start with our first topic, point-of-sale hacking. Adam, why don't you just give us a quick rundown of what this year was and what our thoughts on this are? What your thoughts are on this?
I mean, this was really the year of the public retail breach. There were so many widely publicized breaches that really grabbed everyone's attention, well beyond the community, frankly. From Home Depot, Neiman Marcus, Michaels, Target, of course. These were all widely publicized. They impacted a lot of people. All our friends and families had to get our credit cards reissued, payment cards, of course, in industry parlance. And so it was a really big thing, and it really made people aware of how potentially fragile the whole payment infrastructure is and what the potential impact of these breaches could be. Although that statement in and of itself, I think, could warrant some debate when we talk about what is the actual impact of these breaches and who's actually impacted and what is the cost. Personally, as a consumer, I don't see any real direct impact to me. Okay, so what? My card was breached. I call my bank. I say, hey, roll these charges off my statement. They do. They send me a new one, and I'm good to go. Not a huge inconvenience.
Somebody has to pay.
But somebody has to pay, right? And who is that? That's the question.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's just going to increase the whole cost of the use of payment cards for all consumers, I think. So that cost is going to be spread. The card brands are going to pass it down to the retailers through transaction fees and fines. They're going to pass it on to us as consumers. There obviously is some cost there. And, of course, there's some widely publicized numbers of the actual cost to the retailers themselves. Target has had a lot of analysis concerning the actual costs of those of that big breach. So you've got cost to the business, you've got cost to consumers and the general population, you've got cost to the personnel that were involved or at least deemed responsible for that breach at Target. A lot of those people are no longer there. So these costs cannot be overlooked. I think the real question is, what do we do about it? So what?
Right. So that sort of gets us to our point. So what? So what is this that we as information security people need to worry about, think about? Guys, what do you think?
Are POS terminals just overlooked when securing the infrastructure?
Well, one of the big things that we see here is there's been a lot of talk about the adoption of chip and pin technology in the U.S., which is used basically throughout the rest of the world. We still have the legacy infrastructure of the insecure magnetic stripe card readers in most cases. Obviously, some of these merchants that were breached have now rolled out the new payment terminals, and you're seeing those starting to pick up steam, and they're going to have them in place by October of 2015, incidentally. That will help reduce the vulnerability surface area. However, currently, it's still a really big problem. So yes, to your point, there's a lot of challenges. There is the fact that there's the PCI standard, which is certainly an admirable attempt at improving the
admirable attempt
improving the security posture of the payment card industry. But one of the things that we see so much as assessors for PCI is the misunderstanding that compliance is a everyday responsibility. It's not a point in time you come and get audited once a year and then you're deemed compliant and that's it. So beyond the whole fact that it should be well understood, at least within our industry, that just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're, truly secure or have fully mitigated risk to the best of your abilities.
And that doesn't just apply to compliance, that's also security in general. It's not, hey, we're secure, everybody can go home now. It's a work in progress.
That's right. You've got to keep it going
doing.
every day.
I think one of the big problems was, though, is a lot of these companies, a lot of these organizations, they just so to get to your point, James, I think you're right. I think they just flat out overlooked the point of sale terminals because I think there was this mentality of, oh, that's just a firmware. I don't need to think about what's going on inside that device.
It's an appliance.
Right. It's
you
an
don't
appliance.
think about appliances. They just sit there and do what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. There's this kind of mentality among a lot of IT people of I plug it in, it's an appliance, I don't have to think about it. I'm not allowed to touch it. It just sort of, it does its thing, right? And what I think we've all learned is, like everything, every other appliance in the universe, there's an operating system running on that device, which most of them are a Linux variant, right? And Linux is hackable. It's not, any operating system can be hacked if you know the vulnerabilities to it. And that ultimately is what happened, right? Is that this malware hacked or got into these devices and started scraping the memory off of them and got kind of in between the encryption functionality and the operating system. So they were able to basically scrape the cards off the devices before it got encrypted and sent to wherever the heck it was going to go.
And the appliance mentality is actually really kind of dangerous because it's considered an appliance and you just sort of implement them. The industry around them tends to be rather slow and lethargic with actually dealing with updates and giving people ways to manage updates and administer them essentially over their life cycle. So you buy an appliance, you put it in place, and it sits there for years. And how many of us would not update anything for years? I mean, in that span of time, there can be hundreds of updates.
I mean, it's like firmware on your
exactly.
AV equipment at home. I mean, before all your TVs and everything were internet enabled, I certainly wasn't updating firmware on the appliances at my house. They worked, and that's it, and it's fine, and you take that for granted. And I think that's the same thing that we saw with the retail community with a lot of the payment terminals.
So somebody had an interesting comment here, and I don't mean to take us off this, but I think it's an interesting point, and its dimension to this problem is this. So there's been a question asked: consumers are not held liable. Does that breed a sense of complacency? If so, does that contribute to the problem? So I'll put in my 2 cents here. Yeah, it definitely contributes to the problem. But consumers are really only, again, my opinion, I think one side of the coin here. I think where the complacency problem really is, yeah, consumers are kind of like, whatever, that's, your problem kind of issue. But I think where the real complacency problem is, of course, in the IT departments that aren't updating, the firmware to these devices, that aren't monitoring them, that aren't segmenting them. Well, we found out that Target, their CDE was bridged to some third-party network. I mean, there's obviously a complacency problem among the people who are supposed to know better.
Well, it gets kind of more interesting than that because because you have such kind of a focused narrow market, like POS appliances,
Mm-hmm.
how many manufacturers of these things are there? How many variants are there? There aren't, it's not a hugely rich ecosystem. Plus, you can be fairly assured that a large retailer like Target or Fred Meyer or whatever is going to have generally the same stuff. So if you want to go attack them, you just do your reconnaissance to find out what kind of, POS appliances they've got, and then you start boning up. You grab one off of eBay that's been sitting around forever, and you start dismantling it, and then you've got an attack target.
And the footprint of some of these large retailers is such that the cost of replacing them with the secure payment terminals, which do exist, there is the point-to-point encryption standard with PCI, where you have the hardware security module that actually does the encryption at the actual card read. In fact, if it's a P2E validated payment terminal, would then render that cardholder data that has been encrypted in the HSM from the scope of the merchant. The encryption key is preloaded into the hardware security module by the payment processor, so that the retailer has no ability to ever decrypt that data, even if their entire infrastructure is compromised.
But that also makes it a static target. Kind of like that F5 vulnerability we found that was released a couple months ago with a preloaded SSH key.
Sure.
It just sat there and never changed.
Well,
That's a beautiful.
they are unique keys per. It's not a shared key or anything like this. It's not client-side tokenization. So there's so it's considered to be a secure deployment technology. But that being said, not too many people have it. Target has it now because they had to. People are getting there, but the cost of them replacing how many thousands, tens of thousands of payment terminals do they have at all of their stores is not trivial, and that's the reason that the U.S. has been so slow to adopt these technologies.
One of the things I said in I wrote a blog entry about this I published a while back ago, and I think one of the challenges we have that retail has is that it's on such a shoestring. There's so little margin in retail these days. There's so little left over for the retailer after they pay for everything, and retail is kind of getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed on margin from online, from a variety of other sources, whatever. So it's kind of to the point where it's like these organizations can't afford the security controls they need, and because of that, they end up constantly looking for shortcuts. I mean, we see this all the time, right? Organizations that are in this sort of they're like perpetually on this, what can I cut out? How can I shortcut this problem? How can I make it just go away and get off my radar? And that ultimately I think breeds this kind of like, I don't want to deal with it, just make it all go away kind of mentality that exists in these organizations.
We see a lot the financial constraint excuse for why we can't do things more securely. And I certainly understand, of course, your businesses exist by definition to make money, right? But the fact is, the organizations that we see, at least I personally see, that have the most robust security programs, it's not because they're throwing a ton of money at technology and people. Of course, total shoestring budget where you have one guy that is supposed to do the job of 5 people is not going to be successful. And you do need some technology, but to me, it's really about having that culture of security from the top down where people really embrace it and understand it and taking it seriously. We talk about the various potential chinks in the armor. It's the technology, it's the process, it's the people, and the people are always going to be the weak link to some degree. That's why we do so much security awareness testing. And the fact of the matter is, if you really have a pervasive culture of security, that should not cost you hardly anything, and that, in my experience, really buys a lot of security value, even down to the end user, the cashiers. It's not just the IT admins that might be a little bit more diligent doing their daily log reviews or whatever their operational security tasks are. So the concept that it takes money to be secure is a little bit spurious.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. This idea that security is only for people with a lot of money is we've been able to disprove that a lot. It just seems like organizations constantly use that as an excuse to not do the right thing. So Another question came up. So this is, I think, another little interesting tidbit on this, and then we got to move on to our next topic. But so the question is point-of-sale systems that are enabled to be for use with iPhone, iPad, Android. What is it done to prevent information from a swipe point-of-sale being attacked? So if I understand the question, and I'm going to kind of rephrase it, is what sort of security controls exist on these like iPhone and iPad and Android type card reader point-of-sale systems? And I think the answer is there is none.
Well, I mean, the standards that are used for them, like most of those use NFC as a communication method, and then they have their own protocols.
Right.
Like it's essentially, a point-in-time communication of a particular protocol that they've, obviously pre-configured on either end.
Yeah.
And they have their own security controls built in. Apple Pay actually has done a pretty good job analytically, at least. I mean,
and
we'll need to see how it lives, but so far it sounds pretty good.
And there is the PTS, pin transaction security standard within PCI for the terminals to cover NFC deployments as well. So that is addressed at the hardware
But then
level.
you have the card reader that you actually plug into those devices. And so you've got the little card swipe reader itself that plugs into the iPhone, the iPad, the Android.
Oh, okay, I
And
understand.
then you take a payment that way.
Sure.
And so they're as secure as the people that write the code.
Yeah.
And where's that code written?
Right. No, I was thinking in regards to actually using your phone for payment, but you're talking about the food cart square or something like this.
Right.
Yeah.
I know from my perspective, if I see, and I this is probably a stupid sort of feeling, but when I see a iPad or an iPhone, I'm slightly more inclined to be okay with it than if I see an Android device. And that's just because and I know there's a bunch of Android people who now just, banging their heads, how dare you say anything wrong about Android? It's the most glorious thing in the entire universe.
So how you liking your new MacBook?
I'm getting there with it. But, it's this one thing, and I heard this years ago at RSA. I went to this mobile seminar thing, and, it made a lot of sense when they said it. This one researcher guy, I don't remember who it was, said, like it or not, Apple and their products, it's a police state. It's, everything has to be blessed from Tim Cook or, the ghost of Steve Jobs himself personally, and nothing happens in an Apple environment unless Apple says it's okay to do it. Which is, you could say that's wrong and freedom and whatever, but the truth is that mere sort of architectural design tends to render a fairly secure infrastructure. Yeah, Apple, of course, knows everything about you and probably hands it over to the NSA, but at least the hackers don't, right? Well, and Android, of course, is wide open.
Let me bring it back around. Let me bring it back around, though. They were talking about the card swiping on these devices, and I'll bring it back to where we started. So what? If the device gets hacked and my credit card gets stolen, I find a few charges that aren't mine. I dispute them. They get taken off my account, and I get a new card.
Right.
So it goes back to so what?
And the CIO gets fired.
And the retailer, if the retailer that is the point of origin for the compromise is fined, not in every case does the retailer that uses these technologies is a small guy, but a lot of times that's the reason, right? Although you'll like REI, for example, where I shop at, uses those as well, and obviously they're a large corporation. But the smaller guys that are using these, the food carts and such, they probably cannot withstand some type of significant fine if they are the point of a breach. Although their volume will be low, and frankly, they might be willing to take the business risk because they're startup business anyway.
Well, and they're going to point back to where they got their technology.
Yeah.
If they accounted for, hey, I went to somebody, they say they're PCI compliant, they have, the paperwork to show it. What's their liability? They relied on somebody that's an expert.
Well, don't get us started on bad PCI audits because that's a whole other frothy topic in and of itself. A lot of us, I know we talk about this a lot. We still don't understand how places like Target and such can be considered PCI compliant when they were so egregiously not compliant. But that's a different problem.
I know we need to segue, but the only thing I would add there is that the fact of the matter is, as an assessor myself, there is a big difference between passing your assessment, which is a point-in-time validation on an annual basis, and being compliant, which is an everyday 24/7 activity. And that, I think, is where it falls down. So you can't necessarily blame the assessor and say, oh, how can they let this stuff slide? I've done plenty of assessments where it seemed to me that they probably got ready quickly before I came. Everything was good, and probably as soon as I left, they popped the champagne, high five, and say, well, let's worry about that in 11 and a half months, and just let everything. And so that's not my fault.
No, of course not.
So,
we've also seen plenty of organizations that were compliant for many years, dutifully checked off by a PCI auditor. And then for whatever reason, we come in and we're like, how on earth did this place ever mean? But that's a different problem.
It's an interpretive standard, but there's also, of course, room for.
Right.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on to our next topic because I'm about ready to.
Very dangerous right now.
Yeah, very dangerous. Get to that point where I'm going to say something stupid. Let's talk about something that is sure to inflame us all, cyber war. So this is our next topic. I'll start with my opinion on this because I, of course, have one. I haven't been a big fan of the whole cyber war sort of issue, this idea of nation states, of Chinese or Iranian hackers, of all this. I personally think it's an issue that's exceedingly way overblown in our industry. I think it's an issue that people love to, froth about nonstop. They always want to go on and on and on about how the Chinese are hacking us. Oh, what are we going to do about it? And it's like, it seems to be more of an emotional topic than a security topic. That's my opinion of it. And when I hear people start going off on it, the common thing is all, can you believe the Chinese are hacking us? Yeah, it's been going on for a long time. It's not new. Where have you been? It's not like something new. And then I sort of say, okay, so does it matter if some Chinese nation state, Uber hacker guy hacks you, or some criminal in Romania hacks you, or in, Bali or Detroit? Does it really matter at the end of the day? That sort of is where I'm like, who cares that the Chinese hack you? What's the point here?
Because your protocol should be the same, generally speaking, regardless of who the potential adversary is. When we talk about the best practices, which are still fundamentally lacking, really throughout the industry. I mean, we talk about the defense in depth, having good security programs to prevent the breach, having actionable incident response programs to be able to detect and contain.
Business continuity and disaster recovery if you didn't.
Right, you're going to need
Incident
these.
response.
Sony would have had to do what they need to do to have mitigated their risk, regardless if it was North Korea that was behind their breach or if it was some, anonymous activist hacking group or a disgruntled technology guy that got fired from there.
I agree that it doesn't matter whether it's from Russia or from Korea or from China or from somewhere else. I think, though, the difference is we've seen an escalation. In the past, when companies were hacked, it was hacked for financial information or personal data to get to financial gain. And what we're seeing now is, especially with the one with Sony, it doesn't look like that's so much for financial gain as just to damage the company.
So the threat landscape has changed in that regard.
Changed. And the resources behind the attack have gone from people with financial backing to what look like a nation state. And they've got a heck of a lot more resources than any one individual company does. And so it's not so much nation state against nation state so much anymore as it appears to be nation state now targeting individual companies within a country.
So when they're doing their threat modeling for their risk assessments, that should be something that maybe the average corporation can no longer say, cyber warfare is not a credible threat to me because I'm not a country.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
I can buy that.
And what about the casino one with the Iranians as well, right?
Yeah,
Same
that
thing.
was very similar to
It was
Sony.
for damage.
Right.
Yeah.
So they weren't trying to steal money or it was a retaliatory response.
And so it's also crossed from the public utilities. It used to be if you were making power, transportation, things like that, that was obvious. You need to be aware of that. And it's now transferred. If you're a private company and you are of interest, then you can be a target now. And the way that the casino was targeted was it was an inflammatory comment by a member of the board. So, you can have somebody speak up in media anywhere, social media, news, radio, whatever, and could become a target to a nation state who just doesn't like your point of view.
Or a target of anybody. I mean, we are now all very well connected together, and I mean, you're just as likely to inflame, a group of hackers in a nation state that are
the anonymous group
that are working for the nation state, or just are jingoistic about the nation state, or are anonymous, or some other internet group.
Yeah. I'm also going to lump corporate espionage kind of into the same cyber warfare category.
That's been going on forever.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it has, and the internet's made it very much easier.
Very easy. Because we can't cope with it.
We've seen examples of it. I mean, we've seen organizations that were clearly
absolutely
targeted for stealing of data and designs.
We had a client that made widgets, and within 2 or 3 days of releasing this brand new widget that was, state of the art, the Chinese had a knockoff that they sold for a fraction of the price.
Right.
Now, this company was large enough that they can absorb, some of that,
Sure.
and they were diverse enough, but still, they took a big hit.
But to your point about the fact that you have to maybe consider that you might be targeted as a corporation by a nation state when you talk about cyber warfare, had their risk management been a little bit more mature, they might have factored that into their threat modeling, and then recognized that maybe they need to increase the number of controls that they're implementing, or reduce that risk in some other manner, be it transferring the risk with insurance or considering the connectivity they have to some of these different countries.
But up until this year, when this actually really came to the forefront, considering that a nation state was going to target you with something like a meteor falling out of the sky.
The probability has increased.
And now, that's changed.
Right.
But
That's actually vaguely
attacked the same.
You're right.
You don't do anything different for China attacking you, or Russia, or anonymous. I mean, there's no. I guess that's the thing that bothers me is that people are always like, what are we going to do about this Chinese hacking? Well, you're going to do the same thing you've always should have been doing, but you're just going to do it like more.
Yeah.
Right.
Why would you think there's any difference in what you need to do?
It's
like
the more
Russian hackers use the same kind of computers that non-Russian hackers are.
That's right.
They're going to be finding same exploits.
Right.
I mean, maybe they find a different one than somebody else was, but
Sure.
they're going to exploit stuff in the same kind of fashion. And
so we have questions around this, and I want to take it to mention this because I want to share another side of my opinion.
Sure
So somebody mentioned a question here. We recently reevaluated our use of Kaspersky because they're located in Russia. I don't think that's a viable reason to look at Kaspersky, but then it says because it's written and maintained by companies in countries that are not friendly to us. One of the things I've come to realize in the last few years is how utterly and completely powerless our government is, and most law enforcement is, when it comes to this nation-state hacking. I think people have this mentality like the U.S. government is, needs to get out there and start, defending us. And the reality is there's literally almost nothing they can do.
Zero.
And I don't think people understand that aspect of the internet, that the internet and the whole design and the whole thing that the internet is, the United States has no unique authority over it to say, you off the network. It doesn't work that way. And so our government, there's literally nothing they can do. We can issue nasty worded letters to the Chinese, say, oh, don't hack us. But I mean, aside from having our government literally take over our network, the internet, and ultimately build, the Great Wall of the United States like China does, which I don't think any of us are for, and those of us who are probably need their heads reevaluated.
We have a policy of non-retaliation, too, that some of the other nation states may not abide by. So we can't proactively.
We have no jurisdiction in China.
Right.
And there's only a handful of countries, and the hack would have to be severe enough. We would have to get diplomats involved, extradition treaty. I mean, it would be this whole thing.
Well, but we have tried to set some precedent by dealing with American companies' servers in other countries and claiming that we have jurisdiction over them because of the origin of the company.
Ooh, there's a good topic on that in cloud in Europe. And don't forget the cloud Europe thing.
Microsoft just had a big angry thing about it because they essentially told the U.S. government that they don't own the world's servers.
Right.
But
but that means we're trying to own the world's servers. So I mean, I don't think it's completely the case that the United States is not trying to do to extend its reach and exert its?
I think it's trying
influence?
to. I mean, the NSA wants to stick their fingers into everybody's accounts, right? But it's sort of like everybody has this mentality of like the NSA is a bunch of these nasty, mean, hateful people sitting there just waiting for you to say, a dirty word on the internet so they can come and, take you away to the maximum security, re-education camps. And it's like, I don't think they really give a crap about you in your personal life. I think it's more of this, grand thing. And when I think about it, I mean, I always sort of have that mentality of like, let's remember that anything the government built was built by the lowest bidder. So at best, it's crap. And so, yeah, they have moments of genius, but they're few and far between.
But there are some resources available to help organizations. So they, the government may be somewhat powerless to, proactively try to lessen the capabilities, the offensive capabilities of some of these nation states that are active in cyber warfare, at least officially. But certainly, if you're the victim of a potential breach, they do make resources available to try to support U.S. companies.
I will give them credit that they're starting to kind of get the NIST standards and frameworks to be a little more workable in the real world. I mean, NIST for a long time was like, you'd read it and it's like, wow, that's fascinating, Chuck.
Although I will say this, the resources that are available are somewhat meager. I was involved with a IR case this summer where the FBI was involved with the helping the organization, but only so much so that they can gather data about the Iranian hacking group that was behind the breach. They were not interested in actually helping this company remediate, contain, eradicate.
Right.
They basically were involved with the notification saying, hey, we've been watching these guys. You guys have been compromised. We want to come in and gather some data. Okay, we've got what you need. Your place is a mess. Good luck with that.
Yeah, have a nice life.
So, I mean, the resources are there, but
I think it's important for everybody to remember that the government and law enforcement's role is they want to go after criminals, and they want to go after ones they can actually catch and they can get a case against. They don't care about your server, server, unless it's spewing out data that they want. But at the end of the day, they just flat out don't care about your server.
Right. Yeah, if it's not data that's critical to the...
So there's a couple of points made here, and I want to address a few of these, and then I want to move on. I want to try and move on to our next topic, because a few of them I think are interesting. So somebody mentioned cyber insurance up here, this question. Transferring risk through cyber insurance based on these attacks. So what are your opinions of cyber insurance, guys? I mean, can you transfer risk of nation state or any hacking off to cyber insurance?
I think the thing is, when you're talking about risk, when you're talking about insurance and transferring the risk, you're transferring some degree of fiscal liability. You're not transferring any of the reputational liability, which is probably going to have the biggest financial impact. So, okay, you get breached. Lloyd's of London cuts you a check for $5 million to pay for the IR and some new gear or whatever, and maybe however much money was exfiltrated. If Target had cyber insurance, that didn't factor into the huge hit their stock took, to the fact that the C-suite guys all got fired. All of the customers went elsewhere.
Right.
So, it might augment some of the risk mitigation procedures that you're taking, but
it would help them pay the financial toll.
Right.
I read somewhere that they're in it for $40 million, and the class action lawsuits haven't even hit yet.
Yeah.
So
Krebs on security, his blog has a big write-up on that. That's probably where I think you got the number from.
Here's something that's interesting, though, in the cybersecurity, and I read an article just the other day that the companies that are doing cyber and security insurance, they're doing insurance on this. For a long time, it was sort of like, okay, pay this, you get this much coverage. They had a couple of basic questions. What's happening is a lot of these organizations now are conducting their own audits against the companies they're insuring. And what I found interesting, and I thought this was surprisingly forward-looking, they're not necessarily, because traditionally in a risk mitigation sort of insurance, you always sort of look back at the past and say, okay, well, past performance is the best indicator of future
Car
performance.
insurance.
Right.
My speeding tickets. Yeah.
Car insurance. They've taken this approach of, okay, we don't really care what you were doing 2 and 3 years ago because that just doesn't apply in this world. What we want to understand now is what is your capability to respond to an incident? What is your capability to deal with a problem versus what happened in the past? And I thought that was surprisingly forward-looking for an insurance industry, which is not usually thought of as a forward-looking industry. But it was a good approach to this because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. It isn't so much, have you been hacked before? Yeah, you've been hacked before, whatever. Do you have the capability in your organization to respond to this? Do you have the tools? Do you have the people? Do you have the processes? Do you have the products? Do you have all the tech and the capability to do something about this? And what they're saying is we're not going to insure you unless you have that. If you don't have these controls in place, if you don't have people, we aren't insuring you because you don't have the capability to respond to these.
Your car insurance is more expensive if your car is old enough and doesn't have airbags, doesn't have anti-lock brakes.
Yeah.
I think it's this whole understanding now that it's not a question of if, but when an organization is going to be breached. And so if you operate on that premise that it's just a matter of time before you get breached, then the question is, okay, so what? What does that really mean if you do get breached? And the answer to the so what depends on what your capabilities are from
Today.
How mature your security program is to prevent, to encapsulate where the breach might have occurred, to contain it, to detect it, to respond. And that's what minimizes the true impact, right? So, is the breach the one workstation that had an old version of Java that got some malware on it? Or does that spread like wildfire through the entire organization?
Yeah. I think it's interesting, though, and I just want to make this last commentary, that I see a lot of people in the industry always doing this, look at where we were, look at where we were, look at where we were 10 years ago. And it's like, who cares where we were 10 years ago? 10 years ago is like utterly irrelevant in our industry now. It's like, can you believe that the world's, bad now? The world was bad 10 years ago, too. It's just you didn't know it was there. So
we fool ourselves. And 10 years ago, Europe was using chip and pin, and we're still not using it.
Yeah.
So,
that's sort of like, what I found interesting on that was the insurance industry had this very forward-looking sort of viewpoint, which is great. I was really happy to see that because I don't see that when I go out to a lot of these, like, I was at this event about 3 or 4 months ago, and the speaker went on for like 20, 30 minutes about, back in 1992 we had, and it's like, who cares? Where are we going? Not where have we been? Anyways,
but the point is, even though we are somewhat looking back on 2014 by virtue of this webinar here, looking at what changed with the threat landscape, I think what we really want to focus on is, okay, so based on these changes, what are we going to do next year about it, right?
And one thing also I noticed is risk now has come to the forefront in the last 12 months, more so than the year before.
Yeah.
You're seeing a lot more risk-based everything.
Yeah.
So you got risk-based incident response, risk-based protections. So there's a lot more of that going on now. So people are starting to pay attention. Instead of spreading the money over our whole infrastructure, let's concentrate it on this one part that's important and just accept the fact that somewhere along the line we may be breached over here, but it doesn't really matter.
Right. Or we have the mechanism to respond to it. All right, let's get down to our last topic. And I feel like we've answered most of these questions, but thank you, by the way. There's a couple of comments in here, so some great contributions as well. But I want to get to our last topic, which I think is a very, very important topic. Which is migration to the cloud. The cloud has been around now for a while. I think we all, it's not a new thing, right? We've had cloud services and cloud providers. Now everything is in the cloud. You're putting it in the iCloud and the Google Drives and the whatever. And of course, there's cloud servers and cloud services, and you can put your entire infrastructure. I can say from my perspective on this. I have the fortune to, I interact with a lot of CEOs and, leadership people as part of my Vistage group, and I go to all these trade shows and everything. There's a real consistent theme I hear from people in leadership about the cloud, which is this mentality of, I am absolutely sick and tired of my IT department, and if I can put my IT department in the cloud, done. I mean, they don't even think twice. It's kind of like, I want to put the whole department in the cloud. At first I'm kind of like, oh, come on, IT guys, we're not all that bad. But, I hate to say it, they kind of, I don't blame them at some points. It's like, I think about it from a business perspective, and a lot of business leaders, we think this way. It's like, look, I want to go to business with this product. I want to do these things. I need IT to make it happen, not sit there and, go, but we need to look at this, and we need to buy that, and we need to, proactively leverage our best-of-breed synergies for blah, blah, blah. We need to implement an internationally accepted framework of controls, and, and as a business leader, I'm like, no, I just make it run, guys. I don't want to hear the blah, 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 excuses and reasons why I can't. So I think among a lot of leaders, there's this mentality of put it in the cloud because it'll just run. I can outsource. I just give it to all the Amazon, give it all to, to Rackspace or whomever, and make it all run and just get out of my hair because I'm sick. One thing I hear a lot of leaders say is, I am sick and tired of buying equipment that every year I buy it and I spend a ton of money and then it doesn't work. It doesn't deliver what I want. I invested zillions of dollars in these Palo Altos or Cisco's or EMCs or whatever, and but you got to buy a this and a that and a that and a this and that and this, and before you know it, I'm now a whole IT shop, and I'm not a whatever business I'm in.
The buying gear and not factoring in the cost of actually renting the gear is, I think, a different problem and something we see all the time. The sales guy never tells you the total cost of ownership of the SIM. He says, buy it for $50K and you'll be awesome. He doesn't mention the salary of the guy that needs to run it full time, how long it's going to take for consultants to integrate it and deploy it to actually leverage the value. That's a little different, though. Your first point, when I hear somebody come to me and ask me, say this, I want my IT department to go away, I want to toss the whole thing in the cloud. Those are the guys I say, no, don't. Because what they're really telling me is I want to absolve myself of all responsibility for IT. And that is where I think we see the most potential for error in migrating to cloud services when organizations think that they can totally absolve themselves of responsibility. The little buzz phrase du jour here is that you could outsource the task but not the responsibility. And if they think they could outsource the responsibility, that is where, in my opinion, they're doomed to fail, because they can't. Doesn't mean that the cloud can't be done securely. Absolutely, you certainly can. And I think it is a very valuable tool, and it is a good opportunity for organizations that don't want to maintain a large IT infrastructure to leverage some of the great cloud providers that are out there. But to say, I just want to make my IT all go away, those are the guys that are basically telling me, I don't want to have any responsibility for it, which means, in my opinion, that they're not going to be able to, in any way, securely and reasonably use the cloud.
So can you make the cloud secure? I mean, let's say you move your infrastructure out. Can it be secure?
It's just as if you kept your infrastructure in-house. You got to do the hard work.
Exactly.
It's just technology. I mean, it can be secured the way anything else can be. You just have to be willing to take somebody's word for it that they are.
The hard part about security is not buying the server, racking it up, and plugging it in.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's your data center or in Amazon or Azure or anything else. It's configuring it. It's monitoring it. It's all of the operational security, those daily tasks that fall through the cracks.
And you can outsource the actual doing of it, but you can't outsource your responsibility for making sure it gets done.
Sure. They don't necessarily know what you want to see, what visibility you require for regulatory compliance or internal governance or whatever the case may be. You tell them to provide me X, Y, and Z, they will. That's what you're paying them for. But they're not just going to proactively assume you want logging cranked up to here, you want reports this frequently on these events, et cetera.
And they don't know your environment well enough to do those things natively anyway. So you're still going to have to do, and I go back to the hard work.
Right.
You got to know the communication going on in your network. You got to know what protocols are needed, and to be able to filter everything else out and get rid of all the noise and all the other things that are dangers to your environment.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's a lot, kind of circling back around to the POS appliances. It's honestly a lot like that, because you have a platform or whatever. I mean, we always use letters and then AAS for everything as a service. It's a product. It's something that you buy for a problem to address that. And you still have to have an understanding of what it's going to do, how to deal with it, how to extract information out of it, how to make it do what you want to do. Because, I mean, how many people actually just go and buy a thing, put the thing on something else that it's supposed to sit on and then call it good.
Co-op people.
Well, yeah, the blinking 12 problem. And how well does that do for them? Like, they just bought a clock that they didn't configure. So it's just, and they've spent a bunch of money, and they have a clock that's just going to blink 12 of them.
But you're raising a problem you're raising a good point there, which is, I don't know, I see this as just everywhere, which is this like these organizations, and the cloud is maybe just laying this problem to bear. It's like they completely lack the ability to differentiate between kind of quality and crap. They completely do not have the ability to understand that you can't just buy something and turn it on and we're good to go.
Well, technology is already...
Why do people do that, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Because technology is already so highly abstracted for almost everybody that you've abstracted the abstraction. Like, now you don't even have a nice little physical box that you play with.
Right.
You just, you type in a bunch of stuff on a keyboard, you throw in your credit card, and then you've got a thing.
Your whole network is your whole network is a web page on AWS, right? I mean, so.
And I mean, as humans, we're bad at abstractions intuitively. Like, we're just not very good at it. We've created lots of them, and now we don't even have a physical, tangible part of the abstraction. It's just it's all abstracted now.
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about it. So what you're saying is that the challenge because I'm thinking about this from also the perspective of how do you communicate with leadership about this issue? Because again, and I agree with you guys. I'm taking sort of the leadership position of this, or what a lot of CIOs or CEOs say, which is this: I don't care. Mm-hmm. I'm in the XYZ. I'm in the widget business. We're putting out widgets. I want to put out the most awesome widget there is in the entire universe, and I don't give a rip about the server you use or the firewall you use or the whatever you need to do, make it happen. So. But what I'm hearing you say is the challenge is that because they have abstracted themselves from that so much.
So many layers.
And there's so many layers of abstraction between the server that needs to be secured or the environment and the leadership that is making the decisions and whatever, that they don't perceive or understand or respect the challenge or the security issue?
I don't think they understand.
They have an understanding of it, yeah.
And they don't understand what their responsibilities are either. This is a big challenge for the cloud providers right now. They're really trying to evangelize to the broader community exactly what they provide and what they don't provide, so people understand this. It's that misunderstanding that I think is slowing some of the more widespread adoption that I personally think we're likely to see and is inevitable when you're talking about cloud, not just, we have our sales data in Salesforce, but I'm talking our entire network is in Amazon or in Azure or something like that. The reason you're seeing less of that than we probably will in the future is people don't fully understand it, and it's not because it's abstracted. They don't really understand, I do have some responsibilities here, but I'm not really sure what they are or exactly how I would do it.
Well, I'm saying even the responsibility is abstracted. Like, every single layer of this is abstracted from an abstraction. Like, we already had, 10 years ago we had, software and servers and everything was tangible, and we had connectivity, and we had trouble wrapping our heads around that.
Right.
And now we don't even have that. We just have bits of those that we lease on a month-to-month basis or per user or whatever.
It's a challenge, I think, and that's probably where your biggest likelihood of having insecure cloud deployments comes from, not the fact that the infrastructure itself is inherently insecure. It's people's misunderstanding of how to fully leverage it. And one other thing I would add there, too, when we talk about cloud is if I'm doing general assessments and stuff and I talk to organizations and say, hey, do you guys use the cloud? They say, no, we don't. And then I go meet with other departments, okay, and IT thinks, yeah, we don't use the cloud. We host everything right here. There's the data center. Check it out.
We just host all of our files on Google.
Yeah, and then we go meet with sales, and it's like, okay, where's our sales data? Oh, Salesforce, And then it's like, okay, we meet with somebody else, and we have Google Docs. And it's like, okay, so actually you guys are using the cloud all over the place. It's just no one knows about it except for the users, which is even worse, okay? So that is, when we talk about the risk of the cloud, not to fearmonger, again, I think it could be used well. I think it could be used to reduce the total cost of ownership of IT assets, and you can leverage some of the really robust infrastructure that's available, especially when you talk about business continuity and these other things. But there certainly are challenges, and I think that is one of them that I see pretty widely, is that IT departments are not aware of how much data leakage there really is in the cloud within the organization.
I would say there's also the challenge that a lot of these cloud providers, it's easy to say, well, Amazon and, Azure, the big guys, but there's a lot of little guys, too, out there that are trying to enter this space. They're trying to compete against Amazon and Azure, which is, I would say next to impossible, frankly, but they're giving it, they're giving it their good try.
Well, you've got a lot of folks doing hardware hosting.
Yeah.
So they're not even trying to get into the business of the Azures and Google and Amazon. What they're doing is say, hey, give us your servers and we'll take care of them for you.
Right.
And when we start looking at those folks and looking at the actual infrastructure behind it, it's pretty substandard in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Even more so than if you actually just kept the server in-house.
VMware has been pushing a lot of these ISPs to build out their own clouds.
Yeah, no, they've been
VMware and EMC have been really aggressive in getting all these mom and pop local, ISPs to buy these big, EMC, these massive infrastructures of hosting so that they can start running cloud services, so that they can go to their base of, slowly dying customers and say to them, we now can do virtual servers,
Right, it comes back to this whole responsibility thing. Their goal is to provide a service and make it available, right? Their goal is not to lock it down and align it with whatever standard you have. That's your responsibility. And it's also your responsibility to monitor these guys. We see this all the time with various MSPs and hosting providers that are supposed to be responsible for some component of a security program, and unless you're really keeping on top of them, when we come and do these audits and we check once a year and the organization hasn't looked at all until we come back for the assessment, oh, what do you know? Sorry, we forgot to turn on the IPS, or, oh, we were supposed to be doing the scans, that slipped, oh, we'll patch tomorrow. You got to keep on top of them. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I think the cloud is also underscoring the fact that you got to do vendor management. I mean, a lot of IT jobs, a lot of security jobs now are becoming this kind of vendor management role where you have to stay on top of them. But an interesting topic that we kind of touched on, and you brought this up, and we've been hearing about this lately, is this problem of cloud environments that cross borders, and particularly I guess I would call it the sort of European problem. So from what I understand, and I don't know, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand is a lot of the European countries are basically kind of fed up with the sort of U.S.-based cloud providers.
Well, there's extreme paranoia. Every time I go to Europe and do business there, people will not stop talking to me about the NSA and eavesdropping. They are so spooled up over it that I almost feel kind of glib about it, frankly. I'm like, why are we still talking about this?
Well, in some countries, and Germany is one of them, they've actually passed a law now that data collected in Germany cannot leave the borders.
Yeah.
So there are countries taking action on this.
But they culturally, they're highly sensitive to this.
Right.
It applies at legal level as well.
Personal privacy.
Well, and you can kind of understand that because we don't have, this is new and uncharted territory in the world stage at large.
Sure.
And, I mean, how do you consider that when the NSA is collecting data on somebody in a foreign country? Normally, that would be a guy going into the country and exfiltrating data out, which is, usually an aggressive action. I mean, that's a violation of sovereignty.
Sure.
So now we're just doing it all the time,
look
like
at
people
call
download
records
music.
or whatever.
Right. Now we just put a sniffer on the cloud, and we gather the data and dump it into a big.
You just find the transit points and pop your equipment on.
You also see the big providers respond to that now.
Yes.
It used to be
And
before
they're pushing back hard.
when you bought cloud, it didn't matter. Your data went wherever they said it went. And now they've actually got contracts that say, hey, you can choose what country your data is hosted in.
Yeah, Amazon lets you select which locations you're using. You can limit it to specific
geographies.
Yeah, or data center deployments. Or you can have the elasticity that it offers to be dispersed. But if you can't afford that for various legal reasons, you can definitely limit it.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, I think that's a challenge that's not widely understood. So a lot of people would say, well, I can never put my data in the cloud because I need to make sure it never leaves Germany or whatever. Well, no, that is an option now. That is a challenge for the cloud providers. But I think that as they continue to socialize the security services that they can support and offer, I think you're going to see a lot more adoption and momentum in that direction.
Well, don't you think it's requiring these companies who do business kind of transnationally, right? They're required to basically have infrastructures that are specifically in Europe and then infrastructures that may be elsewhere as well. So it's like they have to maintain 2 and 3 different infrastructures to support the various.
Sure, it can be challenging. And then what do they need to do when they need to consume this data, right?
Right.
So they have their German data center and their New York data center, but the guys in New York need to consume the German data. So there are definitely some challenges there.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we're getting close to the end of our time here. We've got about 5 minutes left. I think we've hit most of the questions. Guys, what do you think of the last sort of, so let's looking forward into 2015. Let's put on our crystal balls, crystal hats, whatever you want to call it. And what's going to happen in 2015? What is our predictions of changes, momentums, new things? You know, what do you think is the next big thing? So who wants to start?
The next big thing, I
Okay,
think.
maybe it's a small thing.
I think the POS hacking trend is going to continue next year, and I think it will escalate.
Until October
And get worse.
2015, when every single U.S. merchant will have fully adopted the EMV
Absolutely.
payment terminals.
Overnight.
And then
Exactly.
and at that November 1st, the problem will be solved. So
And
Exactly.
October 14th, there will be just the largest amount of calls out to external providers to implement it by midnight.
I need 10,000 of these installed tomorrow.
That's not a problem, right? Just
Yeah.
send that kid out and we'll just get her done.
I do think the cloud adoption is going to snowball. I mean, I think it's really picking up steam. It's really becoming a mature technology that it was not, in the past. So I think that's inevitable.
We'll just keep refining it too.
Yeah,
We do.
and I think we're going to see a lot more adoption, and since it's still somewhat immature, maybe a shift in retail, the point of sale hacking. I think you're going to see the threat landscape focus on the mobile pay versus the point of sale, because again, we're being facetious that they're going to have the problem fully solved in October when it's mandated that everyone has EMV in the U.S. We know that's not going to happen. There's going to be laggards. And so the POS hacking will still occur, but by and large, the attackers are going over the chink in the armor, and the next least mature technology that's going to be picking up the most payments is going to be mobile pay. So I see that as a big shift.
What do you guys think?
I think risk will continue to be in the spotlight, more so, especially with the insurance companies adding additional pressure. They're scaling the cost of cyber insurance based upon the risk to the company, and that risk-based approach deals with all of the security fences and framework that are put around that business. So I think we're going to continue to see more and more risk-based everything.
There was even talk at the PCI community meeting that I attended this year amongst the assessors and other people involved with PCI that the data security standard, which is the primary one for merchants and service providers, may be moving to a risk-based approach. It's a 3-year life cycle. 3.0 just came out, so we've got some time for this. But there is some murmurs of doing that, as well as a continuous assessment life cycle versus the point in time that they're doing now. But the risk-based approach in particular, because as it stands now, it's not. The old expression, PCI is not a salad bar. You got to do it all, with the exception of compensating controls, which are difficult to legitimately implement. They might be getting away from that and going to a more pragmatic risk-based approach. The problem with risk-based approaches is they're predicated on the assumption that whoever is actually doing this risk analysis knows what they're doing and is qualified to do it.
And we've already seen that a lot of PCI auditors.
Along with more risk-based everything, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's something that needs to mature. You still have a lot of risk-based approaches that the framework for them is 5 and 10 years old. And I think our industry changes too fast to rely on a framework that's 5 or 10 years old. I think just like the risk base now is coming to the forefront, I think the framework behind that needs to improve, and it needs to be as modern as everybody does.
So what you're saying is we need a rapid risk
I
assessment
wasn't gonna go there.
approach here. Maybe we just call it risk now.
Doesn't have to be that. It just has to be something that's
No,
responsive to the
I
business.
think it needs to be that. I think it needs to.
I'll
Anyways.
champion our methodology.
Yeah, I'm sorry to do a little pitch for our rapid risk assessment approach there. Robert, what do you think? Last parting thoughts here.
Sure. I think this year saw the largest amount of large-scale, long-term attacks revealed, like the largest advanced persistent threats. We're going to see more of those that are working right now, and we don't know about them because we haven't found them yet. And we're going to find more of those because they're going to be out there.
I agree. You know, one thing I would like to add quickly, I know we're out of time here. 2014 was nasty. There was so many breaches. It was so widely publicized. But it does make me hopeful. The awareness is very high. Mm-hmm. We have been doing so much work lately. For example, people coming to us and recognizing our incident response program is basically non-existent, right? We need help. And
we want to do it right.
And we want to do it right.
Just checked off on a portal by some, ding dong 1,000 miles away.
And so that, to me, that does make me hopeful.
Yeah. So my last point is really on that point, which is I think I'm hopeful as well. What this year did is it put information security at the C-suite finally. Yeah, it should have been there 10, 15 years ago, and believe me, we were trying, but I think it's finally at the C-suite. CEOs are now talking about things like APT, about PCI compliance, about malware, about attacks. They weren't talking about that 2 or 3 years ago. They're now talking about it. They're now concerned about it. They now see this as as an issue. So the opportunity, I think, is before us as an industry now to seize the moment, so to speak, and to do the right thing. Of course, my natural skepticism also says that there are a lot of other people seizing this moment to beat you over the head to sell you gear. So as I would give my last reminder that I think I say at the end of almost every presentation I get, which is don't ever put a sales guy in charge of your IT security. Remember that you need a strategy. You got to do it from kind of the top down sort of risk-based approach. And I think what's good though is that because the CEOs and CIOs are now aware of this, that's what they want. They're like, I don't want gear. I don't want internationally accepted frameworks of blah, blah, blah. I want to know what the threat to our business is, and I want to know how we're going to fix that. And that's what rapid risk assessment does. So I think we're going to go ahead and close at that point. I want to thank all of you, of course, the panelists here, James and Adam and Jack and Robert for joining us today. I also want to thank Megan, who is off camera over here running the show, and I would also note gave us one of our topics today. So thank you, Megan. You gave us what I think was one of the best topics we had today. So thanks a lot for that. But thank you all for attending today. I hope this has been educational and informational for all of you. If you have additional questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to contact us. You can email us at info@anitian.com. You can hit our webpage. There's a contact form there as well. You can also tweet at Anitian Security. We'll get those. There's lots of different ways to contact us. We did do a recording of this presentation, which will be made available later today or tomorrow. And thank you all for joining, and have a happy holidays and a happy new year.